Since returning to office, President Donald Trump has tried to get back at those who he believes have wronged him. And that includes some of the country's most prominent law firms.
Donald Trump is ramping up his assault on big law with the president issuing.
Trump has signed more than 100 executive orders, and in some of those orders, Trump is targeting law firms directly tied to prosecutors involved in cases that have been against him.
To get back on his good side, some law firms are now pledging to do free work for causes supported by the Trump administration. And as of late last week, the law firms Trump has pressured have promised him nearly $1 billion in legal services.
Have you noticed that lots of law firms have been signing up with Trump? $100 million, another $100 million for damages that they've done.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm your guest host, Laura Benshoff. It's Wednesday, April 16th. Today, Trump's attacks on big law. Law enforcement and criminal justice reporter Mark Berman explains how Trump is using the power of the presidency to muzzle private law firms, and why many lawyers say that undermines the country's entire justice system. Mark spoke with my colleague Colby Itkowitz. I'll let them take it from here.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, thanks for being here. Good.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I really want to dig in on what's happening with law firms and the Trump administration. What is Trump doing exactly to attack and undermine law firms in this country?
Well, the president started issuing executive orders in February, hammering a lot of these law firms with big punishments. So far, the Trump administration has targeted several of the country's most prominent high-profile law firms. We're talking about big international law firms, firms that represent companies and people and often challenge the government. So these are big, powerful firms that do work in and around Washington as well as other major cities around the country and the globe. So the way Trump has done this is he's targeted individual law firms. Each gets their own executive order. And it'll say the title will be something like addressing risks posed by, let's say, the firm WilmerHale. And then Trump will break down the things that he wants the executive branch to do. So he'll order the executive branch to strip them of their government contracts. He'll say that they should lose security clearances. He'll say that they should not be allowed to enter government buildings. He'll also say that the employees should not be hired for government jobs. He is essentially ordering the executive branch to ice out these firms.
Okay, so these executive orders, they strip these law firms of their ability to access the federal government. I mean, we're talking about basic things like going into the federal buildings where they need to do business. I can imagine this is quite disruptive, but can you just break down why this is such a big deal to these law firms?
So there's two elements of this. One is that for some lawyers, their day-to-day job is talking to government officials. They're trying to negotiate settlements. They're trying to represent their clients before regulatory issues. They're trying to advise them on corporate deals, but these deals need government approval. And in all of these cases, losing access to the government can be catastrophic, they say.
I see. And the lawyers wouldn't even be able to go into like federal court buildings?
That's what some of them say is their understanding. And there's a couple of different ways that this affects firms.
Yeah.
Some firms are very reliant on a particular number of attorneys who bring in a lot of money. They have a really high value client. They have a really high value couple of clients, right? Who account for a large share of their revenue. So if a firm is getting targeted and is in a long fight with the Trump administration, that lawyer or that client might say, we don't want to wait this out. We're just going to move our business to another firm. So if a lawyer feels like they can just move from one firm to another and bring their client, it can just carve into a firm's revenue. So firms are terrified of that.
What rationales is he giving for targeting these law firms?
We're going to sign some executive orders.
When Trump is issuing these orders, he's accusing these firms of wrongdoing. He says they threaten public safety and national security. He says they undermine American principles. And he talks about how these firms, in his view, are what he says are committing obvious partisan representations.
This is an absolute honor to sign. What they've done is it's just terrible. It's weaponization. You could say weaponization against a political opponent. And it should never be allowed to happen again.
In his view, some of the things that they have done, some of the cases they've taken up, or the people they've hired are, in his view, too partisan and unfair and acting improperly. But the law firms say they're being punished simply for representing people in causes that Trump opposes, and they say he's simply retaliating against them.
Are there specific examples of law firms that Trump has targeted because he didn't like who they hired or who they represented?
Some of the firms that Trump has targeted, he's been very clear that not only does he accuse the firms of wrongdoing, he has outright stated that they have connections to his perceived foes. So when he issued an executive order targeting the law firm WilmerHale, he noted that WilmerHale had welcomed Robert Mueller, the former special counsel who investigated Trump during his first term, and also hired 2 of his deputies. When Trump targeted the firm Jenner & Block, he noted that the firm had hired Andrew Weissmann, who was also a deputy to Robert Mueller. Now, the firms point out Robert Mueller and Andrew Weissmann left those places 4 years ago. But even though those ties are no longer active, Trump still singled them out when he targeted the firms.
So he's targeting these firms because they hired people that had investigated him in his last administration.
And singling them out for that, yeah.
And so what options do these law firms have here?
Yeah, I mean, when the president started issuing his orders, it looked as if firms essentially had 2 choices. One choice was to fight, to go to court to sue. The other choice was to just eat the punishment. But firms have said these punishments can be catastrophic. Some of these firms have said they would not be able to survive if the punishments were in place. And then pretty soon it became apparent there was a third option, which is cut a deal, which is what the firm Paul Weiss did. And Paul Weiss, Brad Karp, who was, I believe, the chairman of Paul Weiss, the firm essentially said, we would not survive a long fight with the Trump administration. They said that, for one thing, when they started getting targeted, that other firms started coming to try to poach their clients and their lawyers. Some other firms, including firms that have not been targeted with executive orders, have instead cut deals. They've reached deals to promise up to $125 million in free pro bono legal services for causes that Trump and his administration support.
So we're going to talk about the law firms that are fighting these executive orders later. But first, let's dig in on the deal cutting that you just mentioned. You say these law firms have promised to provide free legal work. What kind of issues would that work cover?
Combating anti-Semitism, helping veterans, things of that nature.
So these big law firms are effectively offering pro bono work. As I understand it, pro bono work is usually reserved for people that can't afford an attorney. So explain a little bit how pro bono, the type of clients that typically get pro bono work and how this is different.
Pro bono work is often used to help vulnerable populations who need legal representation. And big law firms take a lot of pride in their pro bono work. They dedicate a chunk of their time to trying to help out people in those circumstances. One of the firms that was targeted by the president, Jenner & Block, said in one of its court filings that last year its lawyers spent nearly 91,000 combined hours doing pro bono legal work, which they said was the causes included helping victims of sex trafficking and domestic violence, advocating for veterans, and helping people denied Social Security benefits. But what the lawyers say they're worried about is if these firms are taking on this pro bono work for these causes the Trump administration wants them to do instead, there's only so many hours in the year. So they said those attorneys are going to be doing that at the expense of this other work. One thing we don't know yet is exactly how this is going to play out. We don't know exactly to what degree, what cases will be picked up, what will not. The firms that have made these deals have said, President, the White House is not telling us what cases we can or can't pick up. No one's going to dictate that except for us. And they've also said they're not going to force their lawyers to take up cases they don't want to take up. But that comes with a big but, which is people in the industry are worried that even if the firms say that, even if the firms say nobody's going to tell us what we can and can't take up, people across the industry feel like if a firm makes a deal with the president, they're not going to take up a case or a cause that he would oppose.
Mark, I know that you've actually spoken to attorneys that work at some of these law firms that have cut these deals.
That currently or formerly have worked at some of these firms, yeah.
Okay. And what do they say about the fact that, one, Trump is targeting big law, but two, that their bosses, either current or former, are taking this extraordinary step of cutting this deal with the White House?
There are some lawyers who say they do feel sympathy for the lawyers who have to make these decisions. They say they know they're big firms with a lot of people on the payroll, and they know there's a lot of factors involved. But a lot of the attorneys I've spoken to are very, very unhappy about the firms cutting deals.
After the break, Colby and Mark take a look at firms that decided to fight. We'll be right back.
I'm Carol Leonnig. I'm an investigative reporter at The Washington Post. My basic assignment is to help readers understand complex government policies and government officials' claims and figure out if they're getting the true story. We work to expose what's hidden and what powerful people want to keep hidden. We dig deep to reveal what's true, and readers don't have time to do that. Only we can bring to you the reality of how a Medicare program is repeatedly failing. Only we can dig in and figure out that somebody who's nominated for a really important job made up a big part of his resume. Subscriptions support this work. I'm Carol Leonnig, and I'm one of the people behind the Post.
So, Mark, there's all these law firms that are coughing up millions of dollars to cut these deals with Trump. But like you said, there's also other law firms that are taking a different approach. Talk to me about them and how they're fighting back.
Since Trump started issuing executive orders in February, 4 different law firms have sued to fight his orders. Those firms are Perkins Coie, WilmerHale, Jenner & Block, and most recently, Sussman Godfrey. And in all 4 of those cases, the firms filed lawsuits in Washington, D.C., and judges almost immediately granted them some relief. They said, we're going to block most of these orders while you're challenging them. And the judges have all in various ways said that these orders deeply concern them, describing them as shocking. One judge said that the order sent a chill down her spine. And these firms have called these orders unconstitutional, and firms are now seeking to get Trump's orders blocked permanently.
But are they the exception or the rule, these 4 law firms?
The firms that are fighting are the exception. I mean, we've had 9 law firms cut deals with the administration where they've promised almost $1 billion in combined pro bono money towards legal services. However, the legal industry is split on what to do. Lawyers are not sure if they should fight or if they should make deals. Perkins was the first one to file a lawsuit challenging their order, and there was a filing recently where more than 500 law firms around the country filed to support. They chimed in, they criticized the executive orders overall, they supported Perkins. What was notable, though, was that filing was not signed by any of the 20 largest law firms in the country by revenue, some of which later cut deals with the administration.
Oh, that's interesting. So we're talking like smaller law firms scattered around the country.
As well as some of the larger ones. Not the largest,
Not
but
the
some
largest,
of the larger
but
ones.
some large ones. What could happen with these lawsuits? Do we know if what Trump's doing is even legal?
So the question of whether he can do it is ultimately only going to be answered by the courts. The firms that have challenged have found success in the courts so far. Judges have blocked most of his punishments. But attorneys I talk to expect that one of these challenges, if not all of them, will make their way to the Supreme Court. And at least one of the firms that has sued to challenge it seems to be preparing for the case to make its way to the Supreme Court. WilmerHale, the firm that used to employ Robert Mueller, hired Paul Clement, who was a noted Supreme Court litigator, to represent them in their case. And attorneys I spoke to said that they're expecting this case to make it to the Supreme Court. That's why they hired Paul Clement.
I mean, bigger picture here, what is at stake for the legal profession if President Trump continues these attacks on big law?
Attorneys across the industry say that there is a lot at stake here. The law firms that have cut deals have said they had to do it to keep their firms in business, to keep their firms active. But there are people in the industry who say that the issues here are broader than just one law firm's revenue or whether they stay in business. They say it's about the legal system of this country, right?
Yeah.
These are people who say, if the administration is able to put pressure on law firms and dictate who they can represent, what causes they can or can't take up, they say that weakens the system for everybody else. They say that the president going after law firms specifically because he doesn't like who they've represented before or who they've hired before, it undermines the entire idea that everyone should be able to pick the attorney of their choice, that the attorney should be able to represent them as zealously as they can, even against the government.
Yeah, I mean, is there a sense that there'll be a chilling effect that even if there's some law firms that haven't cut deals with the Trump administration, that they might be reluctant to take on a case, to take on a client who's adversarial to the Trump administration?
There's a big fear of that. And our colleague Michael Birnbaum has reported that there are Biden-era officials who cannot find representation right now. One former official in Biden's administration who is being pulled into litigation in this era and needs a lawyer said that they initially had a pro bono lawyer from a major law firm, and the day after the president targeted the firm Perkins Coie, the attorney said that the firm discovered a conflict of interest and dropped this person as a client. 5 other firms also said they couldn't represent this person due to conflicts.
Wow, so that person now can't find an attorney.
That's right.
Mark, I know that you said that a lot of lawyers are upset particularly with the law firms that are cutting these deals with the president. They're upset. Maybe they're voicing that. Are they doing anything else about it?
Several attorneys at a number of the law firms that cut deals have quit in protest. Some of them have written public letters explaining why they're quitting and why they're leaving their firms. They've criticized their bosses for making these deals. And there are a number of other attorneys at other firms that have debated quitting as well.
And so they're saying, like, on principle, I can't work for a law firm who would cut a deal like this with the president.
Rather than fight.
And there was one associate who spoke to MSNBC, Rachel Cohen. She had quit her job at the firm Skadden Arps when it became clear they were going to make a deal with the Trump administration. And here's what she had to say about what's going on.
We're reaching a point where there's been a lot of correct attention on attacks on judges, but the attacks on lawyers are to prevent us from even needing to get there at all. If there's no lawyers to bring the case, there's no justice system in the United States.
Yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on that, Mark, because it's an interesting point that we've had Trump attacking judges and the judiciary for a long time, but this feels like a new escalation.
That's what people across the industry say. They feel like this is part of a broader campaign that the president and the administration is waging against the legal system. They say it has to be viewed in the context of the president and other officials are constantly criticizing judges who rule against him. You've also now got these efforts to target lawyers and law firms. The president also signed an executive order telling the Attorney General and Homeland Security Secretary to look into sanctioning lawyers that they feel like file frivolous challenges, all of which they say is meant to just chill any legal challenges that the administration could face.
Mark, I mean, how does this move by Trump, and he's made a lot of moves in his first 3 months in office, but kind of show his willingness to use the power of his presidency in new ways to get what he wants and perhaps punish his perceived adversaries?
I think one big difference we've seen between this administration and the last Trump administration is he seems very dead set in a lot of ways on getting retribution against his enemies. In his first administration, we had all these accounts where he wanted to fire this person or wanted that person prosecuted, and it didn't happen. This time, it doesn't seem like he's waiting. It seems like he is finding the people and the places where he has issues with them or what they've done and is going after them.
Mark, I think there are probably many people listening to this, and they're thinking, well, I'm not a lawyer at one of these big firms. I probably couldn't ever afford to have one of these lawyers. Why should I even care about this?
I mean, one way to look at this, and this is the way I've talked about this with friends of mine who've asked why Move Question covering this so much, because I've written like 10 stories about this in the last couple of weeks. One way to look at this is the executive orders and the deals target some of the most prominent, wealthy law firms in this country, where you have partners who can make $20 million a year and they work in these beautiful glass offices across the country and in capitals across Europe, right? Lawyers who are mad about these deals and these orders say it's not just about these lawyers and these firms. They say that if these firms cut deals, if these firms are intimidated, if these firms can't pick and choose who to represent, that trickles down throughout the entire legal system. If the government is going after these big, powerful firms, what would stop them from going after a smaller firm taking up the case of somebody fighting an immigration order or something like that? They say that this trickles down and affects anybody in the system who needs legal representation when they might have to fight the government.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark Berman covers law enforcement and criminal justice for The Post. He spoke with my colleague, Colby Itkowitz. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you love the show, help other people discover it by leaving a rating on Spotify or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Today's show is mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Lucy Perkins. Thanks also to Efrain Hernandez. I'm your guest host, Laura Benshoff. I also produced this episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.